The bar's neon sign flickered, casting a pink glow over the rain-soaked pavement of Seattle's Capitol Hill. Riley Parker, all of 28, leaned against the counter, her calloused hands polishing a glass that didn't need polishing. Tonight, something felt off, like the air was holding its breath, waiting for a storm. She'd seen him before. The man in the tailored suit who now sat at the far end of the bar, his Rolex catching the light like a beacon. Ethan Caldwell, tech mogul, Seattle's golden boy, an irregular who tipped too much and talked too little. But tonight, his eyes weren't on his whiskey. They were on her. You ever think about getting out of this place, Riley? His voice cut through the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. Smooth, calculated, like he'd rehearsed it. Riley raised an eyebrow, setting the glass down with a deliberate clink. This place is my home, she said, her tone light but edged with steel. Why would I leave? Ethan leaned forward, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Because I could make you an offer you'd be stupid to refuse. He slid an envelope across the counter, thick with promise. Riley didn't touch it. She'd heard whispers about him, how he bought out small businesses, turned dive bars into soulless lounges, and left people like her in the dust. But this wasn't just about the bar. His eyes held something personal, something that made her skin prickle. The Rusty Anchor was more than a job to Riley. It was her sanctuary, built from the ashes of a life she'd fought to reclaim. She'd grown up in a small town outside Seattle, where being openly queer meant whispers and closed doors. At 16, she'd come out as a lesbian, and her parents' silence had been louder than any argument. By 18, she was on her own, scraping by, until she found the anchor. The bar's owner, Maggie, a grizzled woman with a heart bigger than her bark, had taken Riley in, taught her the trade, and left her the place when cancer took her too soon. Now, at 28, Riley was the heart of the anchor, pouring drinks and dreams for a community that felt like family. Ethan's envelope sat untouched, a silent challenge. What's in it? Riley asked, crossing her arms. Enough to change your life, he said, his voice low, almost intimate. Sell me the bar. Walk away. You could start over anywhere, Paris, New York, wherever. No more late nights. No more drunks. Freedom. Riley laughed, sharp and unyielding. Freedom. You think I'm trapped here? She gestured to the bar, where a drag queen was laughing with a group of college kids, where two older men held hands over a shared beer. This is freedom. You wouldn't get it. Ethan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes darkened. You're stubborn. I like that. But everyone has a price. Riley. Even you. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. You don't know me, Caldwell. And you don't know what this place means. The night wore on, and Ethan stayed, nursing his drink, watching her. Riley felt his gaze like a weight, but she didn't falter. She poured shots for a bachelorette party, traded jokes with a regular named Sam, and kept the bar's rhythm alive. But the envelope loomed, a reminder that Ethan wasn't just here for a drink. He was here to win. As closing time neared, the crowd thinned, leaving just Ethan and a few stragglers. He stood, buttoning his jacket, and slid the envelope closer. Think about it, Riley. I'm not going anywhere. And neither is my offer. She didn't touch it. Good night, Ethan, she said, turning away to wipe down the counter. But as he walked out into the rain, she felt a spark of unease. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next night, Ethan was back, this time with a new tactic. He didn't bring cash. He brought charm. He laughed with the regulars, bought a round for the house, and told stories of his rise from a nobody coder to a tech titan. Riley watched, wary but intrigued. He was good. The crowd ate it up, and even Sam, who hated suits, clapped Ethan on the back. "You're wasting your time," Riley told him when he approached the bar again. "I'm not selling. I'm not here to buy tonight," he said, his smile disarming. "Just to talk." "You're interesting, Riley. I want to know your story." She snorted. "My story's not for sale either." But Ethan was persistent. Night after night, he came back, each visit chipping away at her defenses. He asked about her life, her dreams, her reasons for staying. And Riley, despite herself, started to answer. Not because of his money or his charm, but because there was something in his Aisa hunger, a loneliness that mirrored her own. One night, after a particularly rough shift, Riley found herself sitting across from him at a quiet table, sharing a beer. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice softer than she meant it to be. "You could have any bar, any business. Why mine?" Ethan looked at her, his guard down for the first time. "Because it's real," he said. "Everything I own is polished, perfect, fake. This place, it's alive. And so are you." Riley's heart skipped, but she pushed it down. "Don't get any ideas, Caldwell. I'm not your type." He laughed, but there was no mockery in it. "You'd be surprised." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Riley didn't know what to make of either of him. But as the nights passed, their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Ethan told her about his own past growing up poor, clawing his way to the top, losing himself along the way. And Riley, against her better judgment, shared pieces of her own story, the rejection, the struggle, the love she'd found in the Anchor's misfit community. But the envelope never left her mind. It was still there, tucked behind the bar, a reminder that Ethan's interest wasn't just personal. He wanted the Anchor in maybe more. Riley wasn't sure which scared her more, losing her bar or letting him in. By the end of the first week, Riley was caught in a dangerous dance. Ethan was no longer just a thread, was a question. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? The bar hummed around her, alive with laughter and music, but the storm was coming. And Riley wasn't sure she'd weather it unscathed. The rain hadn't let up for days, and neither had Ethan's presence. Riley wiped down the bar, her movements automatic, but her mind was elsewhere in the man who'd become a fixture in her world. His charm was a weapon, and she was starting to feel the cuts. Ethan wasn't just a regular anymore. He was a force, slipping into the Anchor's rhythm like he belonged. He'd learned the names of the regulars, knew Sam's favorite beer, and even tipped his hat to the drag queens who ruled Friday nights. But Riley wasn't fooled. Every smile, every story, felt like a step in a game she hadn't agreed to play. Tonight, he sat at the bar with a different energy, less polished, more raw. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed, and his eyes held a weight Riley hadn't seen before. "Rough day at the top?" she asked, sliding him a whiskey without being asked. "You could say that," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. "Ever feel like you're running out of things to conquer?" Riley paused, her rags stilling on the counter. "Not really. I'm too busy keeping this place alive." Ethan's gaze softened. "That's what I like about you. You've got something worth fighting for." The words hit harder than they should have. Riley turned away, busying herself with a stack of glasses, but her heart was racing. She wasn't used to this, someone seeing her, really seeing her, and not running from what they found. But Ethan wasn't just anyone. He was a man who could buy her world and burn it down without blinking. The night unfolded in its usual chaos. A local band played, filling the anchor with gritty guitar riffs and the smell of spilled beer. Riley moved through the crowd, pouring drinks, trading barbs, and keeping the energy high. But Ethan's presence was a constant pull. Like gravity, she couldn't escape. Later, when the crowd thinned, he leaned across the bar, his voice low. "I want to show you something. Tomorrow. Off the clock." Riley's instinct was to say no, to keep the walls up. But something in his eyes' vulnerability maybe made her hesitate. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. Just a drive. You'll like it." Against her better judgment, she agreed. The next day, Ethan picked her up in a sleek black car that looked out of place in the anchor's gritty parking lot. Riley, in her usual jeans and leather jacket, felt like a fish out of water as she slid into the passenger seat. "Where are we going?" she asked, her tone wary. "You'll see," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. They drove out of the city, the urban sprawl giving way to winding roads and evergreen forests. Ethan was quiet, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he pulled into a clearing overlooking a lake, the water shimmering under the late afternoon sun. It was beautiful, untouched, and completely unlike the world Riley knew. "This is where I come when I need to think," Ethan said, stepping out of the car. Riley followed, her boots crunching on the gravel. No meetings, no deals. Just this. Riley looked out at the lake, the quiet settling into her bones. "Why bring me here?" "Because I wanted you to see something real," he said. "You think I'm all about money, Riley. But I'm not. Not always." She wanted to argue, to call him out, but the sincerity in his voice stopped her. Instead, she sat on a nearby rock, letting the moment stretch. They talked not about the bar or his offer, but about smaller things, music, places they'd been, dreams they'd buried. For the first time, Ethan felt less like a threat and more like a person. But the envelope was still there, back at the bar, a shadow over every word. When they returned to the city, Riley felt the weight of it again. Ethan dropped her off at the anchor, his hand lingering on the gear shift. "Think about the offer," he said, his voice soft but firm. "It's still on the table." Riley didn't respond. She stepped out into the rain, her heart a tangle of hope and suspicion. Back inside the bar, she pulled the envelope from its hiding spot and stared at it. She hadn't opened it yet, but its presence was a constant reminder. Ethan wasn't just after her bar. He was after her truth. The next few nights were a blur of routine pouring drinks, laughing with regulars, keeping the anchor's heart beating. But Ethan's visits grew more frequent, his conversations more personal. He told her about his mother, who'd raised him alone, and the guilt he carried for leaving her behind in his climb to the top. Riley shared stories of Maggie, the woman who'd saved her, and the nights she'd spent wondering if she was enough to keep the anchor alive. One night, as the bar closed, Ethan stayed behind. The rain had stopped, and the air was thick with the scent of wet pavement. He leaned against the counter, his eyes searching hers. "What if I'm not just here for the bar?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Riley froze, her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I see you, Riley. And I don't want to lose that." The words were a spark, igniting something she wasn't ready to name. But before she could respond, the door swung open, and Sam stumbled in, drunk and grinning. The moment shattered, and Riley turned away, her mind racing. Ethan was dangerous not because of his money, but because he was making her question everything she'd built. As she locked up that night, the envelope felt heavier than ever. She didn't know what was inside, but she knew one thing. Ethan Caldwell was playing a game she couldn't afford to lose. Riley's nights at the Anchor were her anchor, but Ethan's presence was pulling her adrift. She'd always been sure of who she was. Proud, unapologetic, but his words, his gaze, were stirring doubts she hadn't faced in years. Was she holding onto the bar out of love or fear? The envelope sat behind the counter, unopened, like a bomb waiting to detonate. Riley tried to ignore it, focusing on the rhythm of the bar, the clink of glasses, the laughter of her chosen family, the music that pulsed through the walls. But Ethan's visits were relentless, each one a mix of charm and challenge. He wasn't just a customer anymore. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve. One evening, as the bar buzzed with its usual energy, Ethan arrived with a new edge. He wasn't alone. A woman in her early 30s, polished and poised, clung to his arm. Her name was Claire, he said, introducing her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Riley felt a pang she couldn't name: jealousy, maybe, or betrayal. She pushed it down, pouring Claire a martini with a smile that felt like a mask. "You've got a great place here," Claire said, her voice warm but calculated. "Ethan's told me so much about it." Riley's eyes flicked to Ethan, who was watching her closely. "Has he now?" she said, her tone neutral. "What's he been saying?" Claire laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, just that it's special. Worth investing in." The word investing hit Riley like a punch. She glanced at Ethan, but he was looking at Claire, his expression unreadable. Was this his new play? Bringing in a partner to soften her up? Riley's walls went up, higher than ever. As the night wore on, Claire mingled with the crowd, charming the regulars with ease. Ethan stayed at the bar, his eyes on Riley. "She's just a friend," he said when Claire stepped away. "Business associate. Really?" "Didn't ask," Riley said, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. Ethan leaned closer. "You don't have to be so guarded, Riley. I'm not your enemy." "Then what are you?" She shot back, her voice low. "Because I don't trust people who play games." He didn't flinch. "I'm someone who sees you. And I'm not giving up." The words lingered, heavy and dangerous. Riley turned away, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. She didn't trust him, but she couldn't deny the pull. He was getting under her skin, and she hated it. The next day, Riley found herself thinking about Ethan as she restocked the bar. His stories, his vulnerability, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, it was disarming. But Claire's presence had thrown her off balance. Was she part of his plan, or just a distraction? That night, Ethan came alone. The bar was quieter, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and anticipation. He sat at his usual spot, but his usual charm was gone. He looked tired, almost defeated. "Rough day?" Riley asked, sliding him a drink. "You could say that," he said, his voice raw. "Claire's pushing me to close the deal on the Anchor. Says it's a gold mine." Riley's stomach twisted. "And what do you say?" He looked at her, his eyes searching. "I say it's more than that. But she doesn't get it. And I'm starting to think I don't either." Riley didn't know how to respond. She wanted to believe him, but the envelope was still there, a silent accusation. "Why do you want this place so bad?" she asked. "You've got everything. Money, power, Claire. What's the Anchor to you?" Ethan took a long sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's not just the Anchor. It's you. You're different. You're real." And I'm tired of fake. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, she saw the man behind the suit, the one who'd taken her to the lake, who'd shared pieces of his broken past. But she couldn't let herself forget who he was, a man who could buy her world and walk away. The night ended with no resolution, just more questions. Riley locked up, her mind spinning. She pulled the envelope from its hiding spot and stared at it, her fingers trembling. She still hadn't opened it. Part of her didn't want to know what was inside. Part of her was terrified she already did. The next few days were a blur of tension. Ethan kept coming, sometimes with Claire, sometimes alone. Each visit was a battle between her heart and her head, between trust and suspicion. The bar was her safe haven, but it was starting to feel like a battlefield. One night, as the rain pounded the windows, Ethan stayed after closing. He helped her stack chairs, his silence heavy. When they were alone, he turned to her, his eyes raw with something she couldn't name. "I'm not who you think I am," he said. "I don't want to take this place from you. I want to be part of it." Riley's breath caught. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm here," he said, stepping closer. "Because I keep coming back. Because you're worth more than any deal." The words were a spark, igniting something dangerous. Riley wanted to push him away, to keep her walls up, but she was tired of fighting, tired of being alone. She stepped closer, her heart pounding, and for a moment, the world was just them. But the envelope was still there, a shadow over everything. And Riley knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something bigger, something that could break her heart or set her free. Riley's world was tilting, and Ethan was the axis. The anchor, once her unshakable ground, now felt like quicksand. Every night he came, every conversation they had, pulled her deeper into a dance she didn't know the steps to. The envelope still sat behind the bar, unopened, its weight growing heavier with each passing day. Riley had started to dread it, not because of what it might contain, but because it represented a choice she wasn't ready to make. Sell out, walk away, or fight for the bar, for herself, for whatever was sparking between her and Ethan. Tonight, the bar was alive with a drag show, the air thick with glitter and laughter. Riley moved through the chaos, pouring drinks and trading smiles, but her eyes kept finding Ethan. He was at his usual spot, watching her with an intensity that made her skin burn. Claire wasn't with him tonight, and Riley wasn't sure if that was a relief or a warning. As the show ended and the crowd began to thin, Ethan approached the bar. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice cutting through the fading music. Riley hesitated, then nodded. She led him to a quiet corner, away from the stragglers. "What's on your mind, Caldwell?" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of nerves. "I'm pulling the offer," he said. "The envelope. It's off the table." Riley blinked, caught off guard. "Why?" "Because I was wrong," he said, his voice raw. "I thought I could buy my way into your world. But you don't need my money. You never did." The words hit her like a wave, washing away some of the tension she'd been carrying. But she wasn't ready to let her guard down. "So what do you want now?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You," he said simply. "Not the bar. Just you." Riley's heart stopped. She'd spent years building walls, protecting herself from a world that had rejected her. But Ethan's words were a crack in that armor, letting light in where she'd only known shadow. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Before she could respond, Sam stumbled over, his arm around a new regular. "Riley, you gotta hear this guy's story." He slurred, oblivious to the tension. The moment broke, and Ethan stepped back, his eyes still locked on hers. "Think about it," he said softly, then turned and left. The next few days were a blur of doubt and desire. Riley threw herself into the bar, trying to drown out the noise in her head. But Ethan's absence was as loud as his presence had been. He didn't come back for 3 nights, and Riley hated how much she noticed. On the 4th night, he returned, but he wasn't alone. Claire was with him, her smile sharper than ever. Riley's stomach twisted as she watched them, their heads bent close, their laughter a private language. She poured drinks with a ferocity that startled even Sam, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. When Claire stepped away to take a call, Ethan approached the bar. "Miss me?" he asked, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. "Not really," Riley lied, her voice flat. "What's with the entourage?" Ethan's smile faded. "Claire's just here to wrap up some business. Nothing to do with you or the anchor." "Then why do I feel like I'm in the middle of it?" Riley shot back. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "Because you're in the middle of everything, Riley. You're why I keep coming back." The words were a spark, but Riley was too raw to let them catch. "You can't just say things like that and expect me to fall for it," she said. "I know your type. You take what you want and leave." Ethan's face hardened. "You don't know me at all." "Then prove it," she challenged, her heart pounding. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached across the bar, his hand brushing hers for a fleeting moment. The touch was electric, and Riley pulled back, her breath catching. Ethan didn't push. He just nodded, as if making a silent promise, and walked away. The rest of the night was a haze. Riley moved through her routine, but her mind was on that touch, that moment. She was falling, and she didn't know how to stop. The next day, she finally opened the envelope. Inside was a contract, just as she'd expected, offering her a fortune for the anchor. But there was something else, a handwritten note from Ethan. "This isn't what I want anymore," it read. "But I need you to know I'm serious. About you." Riley's hands shook as she folded the note. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Ethan was a storm, and she was caught in it, unsure if she'd come out whole. But one thing was clear, the anchor wasn't just her home. It was her heart. And Ethan, for better or worse, was starting to claim a piece of it. As the week ended, Riley stood behind the bar, watching the crowd. The anchor was alive, vibrant, hers. But Ethan's note was in her pocket, a weight she couldn't ignore. She didn't know what came next, but she knew one thing: whatever happened, she'd fight for her truth. And maybe, just maybe, Ethan was part of it. The anchor was quieter tonight, the usual chaos softened by a rare Seattle snowfall. Riley watched the flakes drift past the windows, her mind a tangle of Ethan's note and the contract she'd finally read. The numbers were staggering enough to start over anywhere, but the note was what kept her up at night. Ethan hadn't returned since their last encounter, and his absence was a void Riley couldn't ignore. She hated how much she missed him, hated the way her heart leapt at the thought of his touch. She'd spent years defining herself queer, independent, unbreakable, but Ethan was rewriting her story, and she wasn't sure she liked the new draft. The bar was half empty when Claire walked in, alone. Her polished exterior was gone, replaced by a tense energy that set Riley on edge. "We need to talk," Claire said, sliding onto a stool. Riley poured her a drink, her movements deliberate. "About what?" "Ethan," Claire said, her voice sharp. "He's losing focus. Because of you." Riley's stomach twisted, but she kept her face neutral. "Not my problem." It is. Claire snapped. He's pulling out of deals, ignoring investors, all because he's obsessed with this bar. With you. Riley leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. If you've got a point, make it. Claire took a deep breath, her composure slipping. He's not who you think he is. He's not some knight in shining armor. He's a man who gets what he wants, no matter the cost. And right now, he wants you. The words were a knife, twisting in Riley's chest. She wanted to argue, to defend Ethan, but doubt crept in. Was Claire right? Was Ethan just playing a longer game? Leave, Riley said, her voice low. And tell Ethan I'm done with his games. Claire didn't argue. She left her drink untouched and walked out, leaving Riley with a storm of questions. That night, as she locked up, she pulled Ethan's note from her pocket and read it again. I'm serious. About you. The words felt like a lifeline, but she wasn't sure she could trust it. The next day, Ethan returned. He looked different, tired, unshaven, his usual polish gone. He didn't sit at the bar. Instead, he waited by the door, his hands shoved in his pockets. Can we talk? He asked, his voice raw. Riley wanted to say no, to push him away, but something in his eyes stopped her. She nodded, leading him to the back room, away from prying eyes. I heard Claire came by, he said, his voice heavy. Whatever she told you, it's not the whole story. Then what is? Riley demanded. Because I'm tired of guessing. Ethan, you say you want me, but you're still the guy who tried to buy my bar. My home. How do I trust you? Ethan stepped closer, his eyes burning with intensity. You trust me by letting me show you. I'm not perfect, Riley. I've made mistakes. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. The air between them crackled, and Riley felt the pull again, that dangerous, undeniable pull. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let go, but fear held her back. I need time, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his expression a mix of hope and pain. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. He left, and Riley stood alone in the back room, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing: Ethan was changing her, and she wasn't sure she could stop it. The next few nights were a test of her resolve. Ethan kept his distance, but his presence lingered in the bar, in the notes she carried, in the questions she couldn't answer. The anchor was still her home, but it was starting to feel like a cage. She needed to know who Ethan really was and who she was with him. On a quiet Sunday, Riley made a decision. She called Ethan, her hands shaking as she dialed. Meet me at the lake, she said. We need to finish this. They met at the same clearing, the lake shimmering under a gray sky. Ethan looked nervous, his usual confidence replaced by something rawer. What's this about? He asked. Riley took a deep breath, her heart racing. I need to know who you are, Ethan. No games, no deals. Just you. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. I'm a man who spent his life chasing things that don't matter. Money, power, control. But you matter. And I'm terrified of screwing this up. Riley's breath caught. She saw the truth in his eyes, the vulnerability she'd glimpsed before. But she needed more. Then tell me something real, she said. Something no one else knows. Ethan hesitated, then spoke, his voice low. I'm scared. Every day? That I'll end up alone, with nothing but my money to keep me company. That's why I came after the anchor. Not to take it, but to feel something real. The words broke something in Riley. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his. I'm scared too, she admitted. But I'm not running. They stood there, inches apart, the world falling away. For the first time, Riley let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, Ethan was worth the risk. The lake's quiet was a stark contrast to the storm in Riley's chest. She'd let Ethan in, just a crack, but it felt like a floodgate. His confession had stripped away some of her defenses, leaving her raw and exposed. Back at the Anchor, the bar was a haven, but it was also a mirror, reflecting every doubt and desire. Riley poured drinks, laughed with regulars, and kept the rhythm going, but her mind was on Ethan. He hadn't pushed her since their talk at the lake, giving her the space she'd asked for. But his absence was louder than ever. One night, as the bar hummed with its usual energy, a new face appeared, a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and confident, who introduced herself as Lena. She was a lawyer, she said, and she'd heard about the Anchor from Ethan. Riley's guard went up instantly. What's your angle? Riley asked, pouring Lena a whiskey. Lena smiled, unfazed. No angle. Ethan asked me to look into the Anchor's legal standing. Said you might need protection. Riley's stomach twisted. Protection from what? From people like him, Lena said, her tone matter of fact. He's not the only one eyeing this place. Developers have been circling Capitol Hill for years. Ethan's worried you'll get pushed out. Riley didn't know what to make of it. Was this another play? Or was Ethan genuinely trying to help? She thanked Lena and sent her on her way. But the conversation lingered. That night, she pulled the contract from behind the bar and read it again. The numbers were still staggering, but Ethan's note was what held her. I'm serious. About you. The next day, Ethan returned. He didn't sit at the bar, didn't order a drink. He just stood by the door, his eyes finding hers. Can we talk? He asked. Riley nodded, leading him to the back room. The air was thick with unspoken words. What's with the lawyer? She asked, her tone sharp. Ethan didn't flinch. I asked Lena to help. The Anchor's vulnerable. Riley, I don't want you to lose it. Why do you care? She demanded. What's in it for you? Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. You. That's what's in it for me. I don't want your bar. I want you to be safe. Riley's heart pounded. She wanted to push him away, to keep her walls up, but his sincerity was breaking her down. I don't need you to save me, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I know, he said, but I want to try. The moment stretched, heavy and electric. Riley didn't know who moved first, but suddenly they were inches apart, her hand on his chest, his breath warm against her skin. She kissed him, hard and desperate, pouring every fear and hope into it. Ethan kissed her back, his hands gentle but firm, like he was afraid she'd disappear. When they pulled apart, Riley was shaking. This doesn't change anything, she said, her voice unsteady. I'm still not selling. Ethan smiled, a real smile, not the polished one he used to charm. I wouldn't expect anything less. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan was a constant presence, not as a threat, but as a partner. He helped with small repairs, learned the bar's quirks, and even poured drinks on a busy night. The regulars noticed. Some teasing, some wary, but Riley saw the change in him. He wasn't the mogul anymore. He was just Ethan. But the outside world wasn't as kind. Lena's warnings proved true when a developer's offer arrived, more aggressive than Ethan's had ever been. They wanted the Anchor, and they weren't playing nice. Riley felt the pressure mounting, a noose tightening around her home. One night, as the bar closed, Ethan stayed behind. They sat at a quiet table, sharing a beer, the contract and note between them. "What do I do?" Riley asked, her voice breaking. "I can't lose this place." "You won't," Ethan said, his hand covering hers. "We'll fight. Together." Riley looked at him, her heart full and terrified. She'd spent years fighting alone, but now, with Ethan by her side, she felt something new, hope. But hope was dangerous, and the developers were closing in. The anchor was her heart, but Ethan was becoming part of it, and Riley wasn't sure she could protect both. As the snow fell outside, Riley made a choice. She'd fight for the anchor, for herself, for whatever this was with Ethan. But the battle was just beginning, and the cost might be higher than she could pay. The anchor was under siege, and Riley felt every blow. The developer's offer had escalated into threats, legal notices, inspections, whispers of eminent domain. She'd always known Capitol Hill was changing, but she hadn't expected the fight to come so fast, so fierce. Ethan was her unexpected ally. He'd traded his suit for jeans, his boardroom for the bar's backroom, where they pored over legal documents with Lena. Riley watched him, amazed and wary, as he fought for her home with a passion she hadn't thought possible. But every step forward came with a cost. The regulars were nervous, the bar's energy strained. Even Sam, usually unflappable, had started asking questions. "You sure about this guy?" Sam asked one night, nodding toward Ethan, who was helping fix a broken stool. "He's a suit, Riley. They don't change." Riley wanted to argue, but doubt gnawed at her. Ethan had proven himself, but his world, money, power, deals was still a shadow over theirs. She couldn't shake the fear that he'd leave when the fight got too hard. That night, as the bar closed, Ethan pulled her aside. "We're close," he said, his eyes bright with determination. "Lena found a loophole. We can challenge the developer's claim." Riley's heart leapt, but fear followed. "What's it gonna cost?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, and that was enough. "I'm covering it," he said finally. "Legal fees, filings, all of it." Riley stepped back, her walls rising. "I didn't ask for your money." "I know," he said, his voice soft. "But I'm in this, Riley. With you." She wanted to believe him, but the weight of his wealth, his world, was too much. "I need to do this on my own," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't owe you." Ethan's face fell, but he nodded. "Okay. But I'm not going anywhere." The next week was a blur of meetings and sleepless nights. Riley threw herself into the fight, working with Lena to build a case. The anchor wasn't just a bear, it was a community hub, a historic landmark. They had a chance, but it was slim, and the pressure was crushing. Ethan kept his word, staying close but not pushing. He was there when she needed him, offering quiet support, a coffee during a late-night strategy session, a hand on her shoulder when she faltered. Riley felt the pull stronger than ever, but she couldn't let herself fall. Not yet. One night, as the bar emptied, a new threat arrived. A man in a suit, not Ethan, walked in, his smile cold. He introduced himself as a representative of the developers. "We're prepared to make this easy," he said, sliding a new offer across the counter. The number was higher than Ethan's had ever been. Riley didn't touch it. "Not interested," she said, her voice steady. The man's smile didn't waver. "You'll regret this. MS. Parker. We don't lose." He left, but his words lingered, A chill in the air. Riley locked up, her hands shaking. She was tired of fighting, tired of doubting, tired of being alone. She pulled Ethan's note from her pocket. The words a lifeline. I'm serious. About you. The next day, she called him. They met at the lake, the place where they'd first let their guards down. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice raw. I can't lose the anchor. But I can't lose myself either. Ethan took her hand, his touch grounding. You won't. You're stronger than you know. And I'm here, Riley. Not to save you, but to fight with you. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't pull away. For the first time, she let herself believe in him in them. The fight wasn't over, but with Ethan by her side, she felt like she could face it. As they stood by the lake, the snow falling softly around them, Riley made a choice. She'd fight for the anchor, for her community, for her truth. And maybe, just maybe, for Ethan. But the developers were closing in, and the final battle was coming. Riley wasn't sure she'd win, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't go down without a fight. The anchor was a battlefield now, its walls holding the weight of Riley's past and her future. The developers' threats had turned into act. A court date was set, and the neighborhood was buzzing with rumors. Riley felt the pressure like a physical force, but she wasn't alone anymore. Ethan was there, steady and unwavering, his presence a quiet strength. The night before the hearing, the bar was packed. The regulars had rallied, turning the anchor into a fortress of support. Drag queens performed. Sam led a toast. And even Lena showed up, her sharp eyes soft with pride. Riley stood behind the bar, her heart full. This was her home, her family, and she'd fight to her last breath to keep it. Ethan stayed close, helping with drinks and keeping the mood light. But Riley saw the worry in his eyes, the same worry she carried. They hadn't spoken about the kiss, about the line they'd crossed, but it was there, a current running beneath every glance. As the night wound down, Riley pulled Ethan into the back room. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. Ethan shook his head. Don't thank me. This is your fight. I'm just lucky to be part of it. Riley stepped closer, her heart pounding. You're more than that, she said. You're you. She kissed him again, softer this time, but no less desperate. Ethan pulled her close, his hands gentle but firm, and for a moment, the world was just them. When they pulled apart, Riley felt something new, certainty. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wasn't alone. The hearing was a blur of arguments and tension. Lena was a force, her legal prowess keeping the developers on their heels. Riley testified, her voice steady as she spoke about the anchor's history, its role in the community, its place in her heart. Ethan sat in the back, his presence a quiet anchor. When the judge ruled in their favor, citing the anchor's cultural significance, the room erupted. Riley turned to Ethan, tears streaming down her face, and he pulled her into a hug. You did it, he whispered. We did it, she corrected, her voice breaking. The celebration at the anchor that night was electric. The bar was alive with music, laughter, and hope. Riley moved through the crowd, her heart lighter than it had been in years. But as the night wore on, she found Ethan outside, leaning against the wall, staring at the stars. What's wrong? She asked, joining him. He took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. I'm leaving Seattle, he said. I got an offer in New York. A chance to start over, do things differently. Riley's heart stopped. You're leaving? Ethan took her hand, his touch grounding. I don't want to. But I need to figure out who I am without all this money. Deals. Power. I need to be someone who deserves you. Tears stung Riley's eyes, but she nodded. You already are. They stood there, the city humming around them. And Riley knew this wasn't goodbye. Ethan was part of her story now, but so was the anchor, her community, her truth. He'd come back, or she'd find him. Either way, they'd write the next chapter together. Months later, the anchor was thriving, its place in Capitol Hill secure. Riley stood behind the bar, pouring drinks, her heart full. Ethan's letters arrived weekly, each one a piece of his journey, his truth. She kept them in a box beside his note, a reminder of what they'd fought for. The neon sign flickered, casting its pink glow over the street. Riley smiled, her hand steady as she polished a glass. The anchor was her home, her heart, her truth. And Ethan, wherever he was part of it. Her truth had hit harder than cash, and it had won.